The hangar at Whiteman Air Force Base existed in a state of permanent twilight. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting sterile white across the vast concrete expanse where the B-2 Spirit sat like a predator folded into sleep. Its wingspan stretched 172 feet, wider than a 737, yet from certain angles, it seemed to collapse into itself, a geometric impossibility rendered in composite materials and RAM coating that swallowed radar waves like a black hole devoured light. Captain Marcus Aldridge stood beneath the leading edge, close enough to see the seamless panels, the absence of rivets, the way every surface angled deliberately away from perpendicular. After 11 years flying heavies, first the B-52, then transitioning to the Spirit, he still felt something primal when he looked at this aircraft. Not affection, respect tinged with unease. The B-2 didn't behave like other planes. It flew with the grace of something designed by physics professors who'd never met a pilot, computer-stabilized every microsecond because its aerodynamics were fundamentally wrong in all the right ways. "Sir, final mission brief in 20. Aldridge turned. Lieutenant Sarah Chun, his mission commander for this sortie, approached with a tablet glowing against her flight suit. 28 years old, MIT Aerospace Engineering before she joined, she understood the Spirit systems better than anyone in the squadron. The Air Force had spent $2 billion building each of these 21 aircraft. They didn't trust them to romantics. Package loadout confirmed? Aldridge asked. 80 dams. Mix of GBU 31s and 38s. Bunker busters loaded in rotary launchers 1 and 2. Total ordnance, 40,000 pounds. Chin swiped through targeting data. We're hitting the Republican Guard command structure around Baghdad. 12 targets across 6 sectors. Intelligence says Saddam's inner circle uses these facilities for C3, command, control, communications. Aldridge nodded slowly. The GPS-guided joint direct attack munitions were what made the B-2 truly lethal. Stealth got you over the target. Precision killed it. The combination meant a single bomber could accomplish what entire squadrons couldn't in previous wars: penetrate defended airspace, release weapons from high altitude, destroy targets within 3 meters of aim point, and return home before the enemy understood they'd been attacked. Iraqi air defenses? He asked. Extensive on paper, Chin replied. SA-2 and SA-3 batteries ringing Baghdad. SA-SXS mobile around key sites. AAA concentrated near government districts. Plus early warning radars. Soviet P-14s, P-35s, French-made TRS 2100s. She met his eyes, but their integration is poor. Communication between sites is spotty, and none of it was designed to track something with our radar cross-section. The RCS. Aldridge had seen the classified numbers once, years ago during initial qualification. The B-2's radar signature was comparable to a large bird, perhaps a Canada goose. In practical terms, this meant conventional air defense radars couldn't reliably detect it beyond 30 miles, and tracking it for weapons lock was nearly impossible. Meanwhile, the Spirit would be releasing weapons from 45,000 feet, 15 miles slant range from target, already turning for home before bombs impacted. What about the SA-10s? Aldridge asked. Those Russian-built S-300 systems were newer, more sophisticated, with frequency-hopping radars specifically designed to counter stealth technology. 2 batteries confirmed near Baghdad International Airport, Chun said. But Intel thinks they're not fully operational. Parts shortages, training deficiencies. The Iraqis received them in the 90s, but never fully integrated them into the network. She paused. Even if they're active, we'll be using approach corridors that maximize terrain masking and minimize exposure time. Aldridge walked slowly around the B-2's nose gear, his boots echoing in the hangar. The aircraft had no vertical stabilizers, no right angles, nothing for radar energy to bounce cleanly back toward its source. Every edge was serrated or beveled. The engine intake sat buried on top of the wing, baffled to hide the hot turbine faces from infrared seekers. Exhaust mixed with cool bypass air before exiting through narrow slits on the trailing edge, further reducing heat signature. The mission brief took place in a windowless room adjacent to flight operations. 30 personnel crowded around a large digital display showing the route. Whiteman to Diego Garcia for refueling, then the long haul across the Arabian Sea and into Iraqi airspace. Total flight time, 34 hours. 2 pilots would trade off controls, sleep in shifts, eat prepackaged meals, and urinate into relief tubes. The B-2 had no bunks, no real crew rest area, just 2 ejection seats side by side in a cockpit designed for efficiency, not comfort. Colonel Frank Deakins, 509th Operations Group Commander, stood at the front. Silver-haired, 26 years in the Air Force. He'd flown F-111s over Libya in 1986 and planned strike packages during Desert Storm. He knew what air defense suppression looked like when you had to fight for every mile of hostile airspace. Gentlemen, ladies, Deakins began, this is a different kind of war. Iraqi integrated air defense is not what it was in 91. They've had 12 years to rebuild, reposition, learn from their mistakes. But they've also been isolated, sanctioned, unable to modernize effectively. He clicked to a slide showing Baghdad's air defense overlay. Red circles indicating SAM range rings, concentric patterns of redundant coverage. Looks impressive, doesn't it? Deakins continued. In reality, it's a Potemkin village. Their command nodes are vulnerable. Their radar systems are obsolete, and they've never faced an adversary with low observable penetration capability. He nodded toward Aldridge and the other B-2 crews present. That's where you come in. The slide changed. Satellite imagery of a hardened bunker complex in central Baghdad. Thick concrete walls, bermed earthworks, camouflage netting. The kind of structure that required heavy penetrators to kill. This facility, Deakins said, is believed to house Republican Guard leadership elements. We hit it with precision tonight. We decapitate their ability to coordinate defense of the capital. He looked around the room. The strategic message is equally important. When these targets start exploding without warning, without any indication of inbound strike packages, it creates psychological paralysis. They'll know something is overhead. They just won't know what or when it'll strike again. After the brief, Aldridge suited up in silence. The pressure suit, full coverage, integrated survival gear. Felt like wearing a diving rig. Chun ran through checklist items while technicians secured helmet connections and verified oxygen flow. Outside, a fuel truck pulled away from the B-2, its tanks now holding 167,000 pounds of JP-8. Enough range to hit targets 7,000 miles away and return without landing. They walked to the aircraft as dusk settled over Missouri. Aldridge climbed the ladder into the cockpit, settling into the left seat. The instrument panel was a landscape of multifunction displays, glass screens showing flight parameters, weapon status, defensive systems. No analog gauges remained. Everything was fly-by-wire, computer-mediated. The pilots essentially managing a flight control algorithm that kept the unstable airframe balanced in 3 axes. Chun powered up the navigation system. GPS coordinates locked in, 36 pre-programmed waypoints spanning half the globe. She ran diagnostics on the /APQ 181 radar, the low probability of intercept system that could map terrain and identify targets, while emitting signals too weak or too brief for enemy receivers to detect. Stealth checks green, she reported. RAM coding integrity nominal. No anomalies on signature profile. Aldridge started engines. The 4 General Electric F-118 turbofans spooled up with a muted whine, nothing like the roar of conventional bombers. Even at full thrust, the B-2 was quieter than most commercial jets, another element of its ghost-like nature. Tower cleared them for takeoff. Aldridge advanced throttles smoothly, feeling the massive aircraft accelerate down the runway. At rotation speed, he pulled back gently on the stick. The B-2 lifted into the evening air, climbing with surprising grace for something weighing 336,500 pounds fully loaded. Chun retracted gear. Aldridge turned to heading 135, southwest toward the first refueling track. Behind them, Whiteman faded into the darkness. Ahead, 5,000 miles of ocean, then a war zone where Iraqi radar operators would stare at their screens and see nothing but noise, while 40,000 pounds of precision-guided death descended through the night sky. "29 hours to target," Chin said quietly. Aldridge engaged autopilot and settled in for the longest flight of his life. Somewhere over Baghdad, air defense crews were scanning the sky, confident in their systems, unaware that the rules of engagement had fundamentally changed. The Americans were coming. They just wouldn't know it until the bombs hit. Major Rashid Al-Takriti pressed his palms against the plot table, studying the air defense display with growing frustration. The operations center, buried 3 stories beneath a reinforced government building in central Baghdad, should have been the nerve center of Iraq's defensive network. Instead, it felt like commanding an orchestra where half the instruments were broken and the remaining musicians were playing from different sheet music. "Status on Western Sector radar coverage?" he asked, not expecting good news. Captain Walid, hunched over a communication terminal, shook his head. "The P-14 at Al-Taji is intermittent. They report power fluctuations. The backup generator failed last week and replacement parts." He trailed off. Everyone knew the sentence ended the same way: sanctions, shortages, improvisation. Al-Takriti was 42, a career air defense officer who'd survived the catastrophe of 1991. He remembered watching American aircraft operate with impunity above 30,000 feet, while Iraqi interceptors were shot down in droves and SAM batteries were systematically destroyed. The coalition had owned the electromagnetic spectrum, jamming radar, dropping precision weapons, coordinating strikes with an efficiency that seemed almost supernatural. 12 years later, Iraq's military remained a shadow of its former self. The Air Force possessed perhaps 3 dozen operational aircraft, most grounded for maintenance. The integrated air defense system, once considered among the most formidable in the world, was degraded, disconnected, relying on equipment that predated the microprocessor revolution. "What about the French radars?" Al-Takriti asked. "The TRS 2100 systems? Operational at 60% capacity," Walid replied. "But they're short range, good for detecting low-altitude penetrators. But if the Americans come in high," he gestured helplessly. The strategic problem was fundamental. Iraqi air defenses were designed to counter conventional strike packages, formations of fighters and bombers that could be detected at long range, track continuously, and engage with SAMs or interceptors. The system relied on early warning radar, spotting aircraft hundreds of miles out, then cueing weapons batteries as targets approached. Communication between sites happened via landline or radio, coordinated from centers like this one, but the Americans had evolved. Al-Takriti had read reports, studied fragments of intelligence gathered from defectors and technical journals. The U.S. possessed aircraft with reduced radar signatures, so-called stealth technology. The F-117 had demonstrated this in 1991, appearing over Baghdad like apparitions, dropping bombs with no warning. One had eventually been shot down over Serbia in 1999, but that success resulted from luck and a clever SAM commander, not systematic detection. Now rumors spoke of something larger, a bomber with transcontinental range and radar cross-section, so small it was effectively invisible. Al-Takriti had dismissed such claims as propaganda. No aircraft could be truly invisible. Physics didn't allow it. Radar worked by bouncing radio waves off targets. A bomber large enough to carry meaningful ordnance would reflect enough energy to be detected, even if the signature was reduced. "Sir," a lieutenant called from the radar station, "we're receiving reports from Civil Air Control. Multiple radar tracks, high altitude, approaching from the south." Al-Takriti moved to the display. Green blips indicated aircraft. Kuwaiti airspace was full of them, coalition forces staging for the inevitable invasion. But these tracks were different. Steady, purposeful, moving north at high subsonic speed. "Altitude," he asked. 40,000 feet. Speed 500 knots. Formation suggests strike package, possibly F-15ES or F-16s. Alert all SAM batteries in the southern defense belt. Prepare to engage on my command. Al-Takriti felt his pulse quicken after weeks of waiting, watching the coalition build up forces. Perhaps the war was finally beginning in earnest. Minutes crawled past. The radar tracks continued northward, then began to fade. One by one, the green blips winked out, replaced by empty screen. What's happening? Al-Takriti demanded. The lieutenant adjusted controls, frowning. Lost contact. They've either descended below radar horizon or activated jamming. I'm showing increased noise across multiple frequencies. Electronic warfare. The Americans were flooding the spectrum with false signals, obscuring real targets amid cascades of phantom returns. Al-Takriti had expected this. It was standard doctrine, but it left him blind, unable to direct fires, unsure whether the aircraft had turned back or were pressing the attack under cover jamming. Switch to manual tracking. Have SAM batteries use optical systems if necessary. He turned to Walid. Get me situation reports from all radar sites. I want to know what they're seeing. The responses came back fragmented and contradictory. The southern sites reported intermittent contacts. Western sectors showed nothing unusual. The SA-10 battery near the airport briefly locked a target, then lost it. No one had solid tracking data. No one could provide weapons quality information. And then the bombs started falling. The first explosion rattled the operations center. A distant thump felt through 3 stories of concrete and earth. Lights flickered. Dust sifted from ceiling panels. Al-Takriti grabbed the edge of the plot table as a second blast followed. Closer this time, a deep concussive wave that set ears ringing. What's being hit? He shouted over the sudden chaos of ringing phones and shouted commands. Multiple strikes across the city, someone yelled back. Republican Guard headquarters reports direct hit. Ministry of Defense is on fire. Air Force Command bunker. Static consumed the voice as the communication line went dead. Al-Takriti stared at the air defense display. It showed nothing. No inbound tracks. No missile launches. No indication whatsoever that aircraft were overhead releasing weapons. The Americans were bombing Baghdad, and his systems were completely blind to the threat. Did anyone get a radar lock? He demanded. Any SAM battery engage? Head shakes. Negative responses. One captain spoke up hesitantly. Sir, the SA-2 site at Al-Dor reports they briefly detected something, but the signal was too weak to track. They said it looked like a flock of birds on the scope. Birds. 40,000 feet over Baghdad. Precision bombs were falling from aircraft that registered on radar as birds. Another explosion, massive this time, shook the entire building. Emergency lights kicked in, bathing the operations center in red. Al-Takriti realized with cold certainty that they were under attack by something his systems simply could not see. Years of training, Soviet doctrine, carefully plotted defense sectors, all of it meaningless against an adversary who transcended the basic assumptions of air warfare. He thought of his family, living in a neighborhood 3 kilometers north. Were they safe? Were American bombs falling there too? The randomness of it paralyzed him momentarily. How do you defend against an enemy you cannot detect? Sir! Wally was holding a radio handset, his face pale. The SA-10 battery commander says his radar showed a momentary return, altitude 45,000 feet, RCS comparable to a small aircraft. But before they could engage, the target disappeared. He thinks. Walid swallowed. He thinks there might be multiple aircraft up there, beyond our detection threshold. Multiple aircraft? Al-Takriti's mind raced through implications. If the Americans possessed bombers that could penetrate undetected, carry heavy ordnance loads, and strike at will, then air defense became impossible. You couldn't shoot down what you couldn't see. You couldn't coordinate defenses against ghosts. The operations center had become a tomb. Officers stood frozen, watching displays that told them nothing. Outside, Baghdad burned under precision strikes delivered by aircraft that might as well have been invisible. The technological gulf between Iraq and the United States wasn't just wide, it was unbridgeable. They were fighting a 20th century war with 20th century tools against an enemy who'd leaped into a different paradigm entirely. Al-Takriti picked up the secure phone, connecting him to the Ministry of Defense. If it still existed. The line was dead. He tried the Republican Guard headquarters. Dead. Air Force operations. Dead. The Americans weren't just bombing targets. They were systematically destroying command structure, severing connections, reducing Iraq's military to isolated, leaderless fragments. Maintain alert status, he ordered. aware of how hollow it sounded. All batteries weapons-free on any confirmed track. But there would be no confirmed tracks. The aircraft overhead, whatever they were, had been designed specifically to defeat systems like his. As another bomb detonated somewhere above, Al-Takriti wondered if the war had already been decided, not by ground invasion or naval blockade, but by technology so advanced it rendered conventional defense obsolete. The Americans had turned Baghdad's sky into their own personal firing range, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it. Captain Aldridge eased the B-2 into a lazy left turn, maintaining precisely 45,000 feet, while Chin worked the targeting system. Below, through 15 miles of night air, Baghdad sprawled like a constellation. Orange sodium lights marking streets, brighter white clusters indicating government districts, occasional flashes where other munitions were impacting across the city. Bomb doors opening, Chin announced. Mechanical indicators showed the rotary launchers extending into the slipstream. Aldridge felt a barely perceptible vibration as 8 GBU, 31 dams were positioned for release, their GPS guidance systems already computing fall trajectories, adjusting for wind, temperature, and the Earth's rotation. They'd been over Iraqi airspace for 47 minutes. Not a single alarm. No missile launch warnings. No indication whatsoever that Iraqi air defenses knew the spirit of Georgia existed. The Defensive Systems Officer Station, normally occupied by a third crew member in other aircraft, sat empty on the B-2. There was no need. Passive sensors monitored for radar illumination, but the threat displays remained dark. The Iraqis were firing blindly, launching SAMs at phantoms, their radar operators staring at screens filled with nothing but ground clutter and electronic noise. Target acquisition confirmed, Chin said. Republican Guard Command bunker, bearing 085, range 12.3 nautical miles. She cross-checked coordinates against the mission brief. GPS lock solid. Target designated. Aldridge glanced at his own tactical display. The bunker was marked with a red diamond. Priority Alpha target. Walls estimated at 12 feet of reinforced concrete. The GBU-30s they were about to drop weighed 2,000 pounds each, with 700 pounds of high explosive and a hardened penetrator, nose designed to punch through exactly this kind of structure before detonating inside. Weapons release in 30 seconds. Chin counted down. 20 seconds. 15. Aldridge kept the B-2 steady, letting the autopilot hold altitude and heading with machine precision. At these speeds, roughly 450 knots indicated. Even a slight deviation would throw off the carefully calculated ballistics. 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Release. The aircraft gave a subtle upward lurch as 8 2,000-pound bombs dropped free. Aldridge felt it through control stick, a barely perceptible change in weight distribution. Chun was already designating the next target, cycling through the mission list. 12 targets tonight, 80 total weapons, an average of 1 target every 6 minutes. They'd strike, turn, designate the next, strike again, methodically working to the package while Iraqi air defense never fired a shot. On Chen's display, small green icons tracked the falling dams. GPS guided. They were essentially glide bombs with stubby wings and tail fins, steering themselves toward program coordinates with an accuracy measured in single-digit meters. No laser designation required. No pilot holding a crosshair on target through terminal phase. Just satellites 20,000 kilometers overhead, atomic clocks measuring signal delay times, and onboard computers calculating position in three-dimensional space. 43 seconds after release, the 8 bombs impacted within a 200-meter radius of the Republican Guard bunker. 6 struck the structure directly. 2 hit adjacent buildings. The combined explosive force was equivalent to 3 tons of TNT detonating nearly simultaneously. From 45,000 feet, Aldridge saw a brief series of white flashes, then expanding fireballs that merged into a single roiling cloud of orange and black. Secondary explosions followed, ammunition or fuel stores cooking off inside the bunker. A pillar of smoke rose vertically, illuminated from below by spreading fires. Target destroyed, Chin said quietly, moving to next. They flew like this for 90 minutes, a methodical dance of death conducted with computer precision. Target designation, bomb release, impact, confirmation, next target. The weapons bay rotary launchers cycled through their inventory. GBU-31s for hardened structures, smaller GBU-38s for softer targets, massive GBU-37 bunker busters for the deepest facilities. Aldridge had flown combat missions in Desert Storm, dropping unguided iron bombs from high altitude, hoping they'd land somewhere near the target. This was different. This was surgical. Every weapon they released hit within meters of its aim point. Entire buildings disappeared. Command bunkers collapsed. Communication facilities exploded into rubble, and the Iraqis never saw it coming. Defensive systems showing increased SAM activity, Chin reported. Multiple SA, 2 launches, sector northwest. SA, 6 radar active near airport. Aldridge checked the threat display. Red symbols indicated missile launches, but none were tracking the B-2. They were firing blind, putting ordnance into empty sky, hoping to get lucky. The SA-2s were Vietnam-era weapons, large, slow, designed to intercept formations of B-52s. Against a stealthy bomber with minimal radar signature, they were useless. SA-10 has gone active, Chin added. Search mode, frequency hopping pattern. That was more concerning. The S-300 system, NATO designation SA-10, was sophisticated, designed in the 1980s specifically to counter low observable aircraft. Its radar used multiple frequencies simultaneously, making jamming difficult, and could detect targets with reduced RCS at decent ranges. Are they tracking us? Aldridge asked. Negative. Their beam is sweeping sectors 40 degrees south of our position. They don't know where we are. Chin paused. I think they're trying to flush us out, force us to maneuver or activate our own radar. Aldridge said nothing, just held course. The B-2s and /APQ 181 radar was designed for low probability of intercept operation. It emitted very brief pulses, at irregular intervals, using frequencies and waveforms difficult to detect. But the safest thing was not to transmit at all. They had GPS navigation. They had pre-programmed target coordinates. They didn't need to paint targets with active radar. The SA-10 continued searching, its electronic beam sweeping across the sky like a lighthouse, but never catching the spirit of Georgia in its focus. After 5 minutes, it went silent. They've given up, Chin said. Battery is going dark. Aldridge understood the psychology. If you can't see your enemy, if your most advanced system shows nothing but empty sky while your cities explode around you, at some point you stop looking. You conserve ammunition. You wait for a clearer shot. You accept that you're fighting something beyond your capability to engage. Target 11, Air Force Headquarters Complex, northwest Baghdad. Intelligence believed it housed elements of the Iraqi Air Defense Command. Chin designated with GPS coordinates, cross-checked against satellite imagery from mission planning. 8 GBU-38s, 500-pounders. Release in 20 seconds. The lighter weapons were appropriate for above-ground structures. They'd penetrate roofs, detonate inside, collapse buildings without the over-penetration problems heavier bombs sometimes caused. Release. 8 more icons fell on Chen's display. 47 seconds later, the Air Force Headquarters complex ceased to exist. Aldridge watched through the night vision system. A cluster of 3-story buildings abruptly enveloped in white-hot explosions, roofs lifting off, walls crumbling inward, the structures pancaking into their own foundations. Final target, Chin announced. Communications relay station, eastern suburbs. For GBU-31s remaining, Aldridge turned the B-2 to the new heading. Fuel state was still good. They'd taken on 30,000 pounds from a KC-135 tanker over Saudi Arabia, enough for the mission plus reserves. Behind them, Baghdad burned at 12 points, a constellation of fires marking where precision weapons had struck with impersonal efficiency. The communications relay was a hardened underground facility with satellite dishes and antenna arrays topside. It coordinated military communications across the Baghdad region, linking scattered units into a coherent defensive network. Destroying it would further isolate Iraqi forces, leaving them deaf and mute. Target designated. Release in 10 seconds. The last 4 bombs dropped into the night. Aldridge didn't wait to observe impact. He turned the B-2 southwest, setting course for the egress corridor that would take them back over the Kuwait border. Chin closed the bomb bay doors, reducing drag, and ran post-strike diagnostics. All weapons released. 0 malfunctions. Estimated 98% target destruction based on observed impacts. She looked over at Aldridge. That's 80 dams, 12 high-value targets, 94 minutes over Baghdad, and they never shot at us once. Aldridge pushed throttles forward slightly, climbing to 50,000 feet for the transit home. The mission was textbook, exactly what the B-2 had been designed to do 30 years ago when Northrop Grumman's engineers sketched out a flying wing that could penetrate Soviet air defenses. Those defenses had been far more capable than Iraq's degraded systems. The Russians had possessed sophisticated radars, layered SAM coverage, and integrated command structures. Yet even against them, the B-2's stealth characteristics would have provided significant survivability. Against Iraq, it was overkill, a technological mismatch, so profound it felt almost unfair. Think they know what hit them? Chin asked quietly. Aldridge considered the question. Down there, air defense officers would be reviewing radar tapes, trying to understand how a bomber or multiple bombers had crossed their airspace undetected. They'd find fragments, a brief blip here, an anomalous return there, nothing conclusive. Intelligence analysts would compile reports. Eventually, someone would piece together the truth. The Americans possessed aircraft effectively invisible to conventional radar. They'll figure it out, Aldridge said. Not that it'll help them. That was the strategic message embedded in tonight's mission. Not just the physical destruction of targets, but the psychological impact of helplessness. When your air defenses can't detect a threat, when bombs fall from empty sky, when your most sophisticated systems see nothing but ghosts, you realize you've already lost control of the war's most critical domain. The B-2 Spirit of Georgia crossed into Saudi airspace at 0517 hours, just as dawn began breaking over the Persian Gulf. Behind them, Baghdad smoldered under a pall of smoke, its command structure shattered, its defenders staring at radar screens that had revealed nothing while their world exploded around them. Aldridge engaged autopilot and leaned back in his seat, feeling the fatigue of 4 hours at high alert. They still had 29 hours of flying ahead, refueling stops, ocean crossings, the long haul back to Missouri. But the mission was complete. 12 targets destroyed, 0 losses, 0 defenses engaged. The age of invisible warfare had arrived over Baghdad, and the Iraqis never saw it coming. The sun rose over Baghdad on a city transformed by precision violence. Major Al-Takriti stood in what remained of the Republican Guard headquarters, picking through rubble that had been 3 stories of reinforced concrete 48 hours earlier. The building hadn't just collapsed, it had been surgically disassembled, as if some enormous predator had reached down and scooped out its internal organs, leaving only a hollow shell that subsequently imploded. Rescue teams were still pulling bodies from the debris. 73 dead so far, including 2 brigadier generals and a half-dozen staff colonels. The bunker's 12-foot concrete walls had provided 0 protection. The American bombs, whatever they were, had punched straight through, detonating deep inside before the structure could absorb the blast. Engineers examining the damage spoke in hushed tones about penetrator technology beyond anything they'd encountered. Sir, Captain Wally appeared at his elbow, dust-covered, exhausted. The pattern is consistent across all strike sites. Deep penetration, minimal collateral damage to surrounding structures, targeting accuracy within 5 meters. He paused. Whoever did this knew exactly where to hit and possessed weapons sophisticated enough to achieve it. Al-Takriti nodded slowly. Over the past 2 nights, similar strikes had occurred. More ghost bombers appearing from nowhere, more precision weapons falling from empty sky. The air defense network had managed to fire over 200 SAMs, expending millions of dollars in ordnance. Hit rate, 0. Not a single confirmed intercept. Not even a probable hit. His superiors were demanding answers he couldn't provide. How many aircraft? What type? What approach corridors? How to counter them? Al-Takriti had drafted 3 separate reports. each more uncertain than the last. The truth was simple and humiliating. They didn't know. Iraqi air defenses had been rendered obsolete by technology they couldn't detect, couldn't track, and couldn't engage. "What about the SA-10 battery?" he asked. "Any better data from their logs?" Walid shook his head. They recorded 17 anomalous contacts over 3 nights. Brief radar returns, very low RCS, high altitude. But nothing sustained enough for weapons lock. The battery commander said. He hesitated. He said it felt like trying to track shadows. You'd see something for 2 seconds, then it would disappear, then reappear somewhere else entirely. Al-Takriti walked to the edge of the rubble field, looking out over Baghdad. Smoke columns rose from a dozen locations, ministry buildings, command bunkers, communications facilities, all destroyed with clinical precision. And this was just the beginning. American ground forces were massing in Kuwait, tens of thousands of troops preparing to invade. When they came, they'd advance under an umbrella of total air superiority, because the Iraqi Air Force no longer existed as a meaningful force, and the air defense network had been psychologically broken by an enemy it couldn't even see. He thought about his years of training, studying Soviet doctrine, learning to coordinate radar systems and SAM batteries into integrated defense networks. All of it predicated on fundamental assumptions, that aircraft could be detected, tracked, and engaged, that radar provided reliable early warning, that with sufficient firepower and proper positioning, air defenses could impose meaningful costs on attackers. The Americans had invalidated every assumption. They'd built aircraft, apparently large bombers capable of carrying enormous ordnance loads, that simply didn't appear on radar, or appeared so faintly, so intermittently, that tracking was impossible. And they'd married the stealth technology to precision guidance systems that turned every bomb into a guaranteed kill. Had we shot down anything? Al-Takriti asked quietly. In 3 nights of strikes, had we successfully engaged a single American aircraft? 1 cruise missile. Walid replied, an SA-3 battery got lucky. The missile flew directly through their engagement zone at low altitude. But manned aircraft? No, sir. Nothing. Al-Takriti closed his eyes briefly. In 1991, Iraq had at least managed down a few coalition planes, an F-16 and F-15E, a British Tornado. Small victories, but proof that resistance was possible. This time, the Americans were operating with complete impunity. They owned the night sky over Baghdad, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing, the Iraqi military could do about it. Compile a final assessment, he ordered. I want radar coverage maps, engagement attempt logs, damage reports from all strikes. Route it to Air Defense Command with recommendation that we shift to passive defense. Dispersal, camouflage, deception. Active engagement of these aircraft is... He struggled for the right word. Pointless. Walid saluted and departed. Al-Takriti remained standing amid the ruins, watching smoke drift across the city. Somewhere in that smoke was a funeral pyre of conventional air defense doctrine. The Americans hadn't just defeated Iraqi systems. They demonstrated a paradigm shift in warfare itself. The age of radar and interceptors was ending. Something new was emerging, something his country was utterly unprepared to face. He wondered if anyone in Baghdad's surviving leadership understood this, or if they still believed in miracle weapons and last-minute victories, the fantasies that had led Iraq into disaster after disaster. The ghost bombers overhead told a different story. This war was already over, decided not by ground combat, but by technological dominance, so complete it felt like magic. 11,000 miles away, Captain Aldridge sat in the mission debrief room at Whiteman, watching satellite imagery of his strike results. 12 targets, 12 hits. Bomb damage assessment confirmed near total destruction across the board. 0 friendly losses. 0 battle damage to his aircraft. The mission was being held up as a textbook example of stealth bomber employment. Deep penetration, precision strike, complete surprise. Colonel Deacon stood at the front, walking through the timeline. Spirit of George's mission represents what we designed this aircraft to do 30 years ago. Penetrate denied airspace. Strike strategic targets. Return home safely. He clicked to a slide showing Baghdad's air defense network. Iraqi systems fired over 200 SAMs during the initial 72 hours of operations. Hit rate, 0. They quite literally could not see our bombers. Aldridge listened with mixed feelings. Pride in mission accomplishment. They'd done exactly what was asked, performed flawlessly under pressure, but also a vague unease at the lopsided nature of it. Dropping 80 precision bombs on an enemy who couldn't defend themselves felt less like combat and more like execution. Clinical, impersonal, necessary perhaps, but deeply unsettling. Chin caught his eye across the room. She'd voiced similar thoughts during the flight home, somewhere over the Atlantic at 4 a.m., both of them exhausted and wired on coffee. It's too easy, she'd said. We just show up, drop weapons, leave. They never even know we're there until bombs are already falling. That's the point, Aldridge had replied. Minimize risk to our crews. Maximize damage to enemy capability. I know, Chin said quietly. But when warfare becomes this asymmetric, when one side is God mode and the other is playing blind, I don't know. Something about it feels wrong. Aldridge had understood. They were both professional military officers, trained to accomplish missions and follow orders. But the B-2 represented such overwhelming technological advantage that it eliminated any sense of combat as a contest between roughly equal opponents. The Iraqis weren't losing. They'd already lost before the war even began, simply because they didn't possess the technology to defend themselves against American stealth bombers. The debrief concluded with congratulations and mission analysis notes. Aldridge and Chung were scheduled for a second sortie in 96 hours. Different targets, same concept. The B-2 fleet would continue striking throughout the war, each mission reinforcing the message. Iraqi air defenses were irrelevant. Baghdad's sky was American property. Resistance was futile. Later, Aldridge stood outside the hangar, watching the Spirit of Georgia undergo post-flight maintenance. Technicians swarmed over the aircraft, checking systems, inspecting RAM coding, preparing for the next mission. The B-2 looked the same as always, otherworldly, angular, impossibly stealthy. He thought about the Iraqi air defense officers somewhere in Baghdad, staring at radar screens and trying to understand what had hit him. What would Aldridge tell that man if they ever met? That American engineers had spent 30 years and $60 billion developing an aircraft specifically designed to make his job impossible? That stealth technology, GPS-guided weapons, and satellite communications had created a combat capability so advanced it redefined the meaning of air superiority? There are no good answers. Only the reality of a war where one side possessed 21st century technology and the other was fighting with Cold War leftovers. The B-2 spirit wasn't just a weapon. It was proof that the future of warfare belonged to those who could afford to build flying machines that bent physics itself to their will. Chin joined him, following his gaze to the aircraft. You think they'll ever figure out how to counter it? She asked. Stealth technology, it can't stay invisible forever. Eventually, Aldridge said, someone will develop radars in different frequencies or quantum sensors or some other technology that defeats low observable designs. But by then, he shrugged, we'll have moved on to something else. That's how it works. Action and reaction. Technology and counter-technology. And in the meantime, we have aircraft that can fly anywhere, strike anything, and return home safely. Aldridge turned away from the hangar. The Iraqis learned it the hard way. Anyone else thinking about challenging American air power just got the same lesson. That was a strategic message embedded in the B-2's deployment. Don't even try. The cost of building air defenses capable of engaging stealth bombers was prohibitive. The technology gap was too wide. Better to accept American dominance in the air domain and focus resources elsewhere. As Aldridge walked back to his quarters, he couldn't shake a final thought. The ghost war over Baghdad had been won before it started. Iraqi air defense officers had never stood a chance, not because they lacked courage or competence, but because they were playing by rules that no longer applied. The B-2 spirit had rewritten those rules, turning air warfare into something closer to assassination than combat, precise, invisible, and utterly one-sided. The age of stealth had arrived. Baghdad had been its proving ground, and the lesson was clear. In modern warfare, invisibility wasn't just an advantage. It was dominance itself.